Hi there, this is Jennifer McGuire, and I'm doing this video for Studio Calico, and this just shows you some fun ways to use some of the Studio Calico products. And I'm going to feature one of their products and show you 3 different ways to use it. Now the product that I'm showing this month are the Studio Calico scraps. These are really fun to use, they're very unique. They're actually basically like tissue trims. So it's kind of like a tissue paper consistency, but they're these long strips and they all have a fun pattern or a decorative edge that makes them fun for unique embellishments or just adding something a little bit special to a project. And since they're so thin, you can get away with doing some really fun techniques that if you tried to do with regular paper, it would just be too difficult. So I'm going to show you 3 different things to do with it. The first thing we're going to do is create a flower. And I did that on this card here, but you could definitely do this on a scrapbook page because since it's very thin, you can make this without it being too bulky. There's a closer look at the flower that I created. So in an earlier video, you saw me do something for Studio Calico where I cut fringe onto a paper strip and rolled it up to create fringe flowers. Well, we're doing kind of the same idea, but with this, and it's much faster. So I put some adhesive on that flat edge, just on the flat edge of the strip. And then on the scallops, I'm cutting down almost to the other side of each of the scallops. So I'm leaving like 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch there where the adhesive is, where I don't cut all the way through. So now that I've got adhesive on the edge and those little cuts at each scallop, I'm going to start wrapping this around a paintbrush. You can use a pencil, anything. But I'm wrapping it with the adhesive on the outside so that when I roll it, it just glues right to itself. And it's kind of hard to get started, but once you get started, it'll just lay nicely on top of each other. So you just keep going and going. And I used almost the whole strip for this. That way I could get a really big, fluffy flower. So I'll just keep wrapping here. And once you're done, you can just slide it right off of the paintbrush, and you have like what looks kind of like a tassel. Now since this is thin, you want to be careful kind of pulling each of the petals out, and you just keep working your way around until you have all of the petals fluffed out into a flower. And you can kind of press them and work them as you go. I just go ahead and pull them all down, and then when I'm done, kind of work it into a nice flower. And there you have it, a fun little flower. And you can squish this down pretty good so that it's not too bulky. And here's a closer look at the final flower. I wanted to show you some of the other tricks that I did on this card also. And the first is I used one of the Studio Calico labels here. These are great kind of textured stickers that are just beautiful. And I wanted it to be a little more muted, so I'm actually using a Copic marker to color. You can use any marker you want, or you can use any ink you want. And then I wanted to use it raised on the card, so I'm actually adhering it to cardstock and cutting it out. You could also cover the back with like an anti-stick or something so that the stickiness goes away. And then I'm using some distress ink and an ink blending tool just to kind of age the edges. You can use other inks for this part, but I find that the distress inks and the ink blending tool are the best at getting that blended edge. Then I'm going to use the same color just to add a little bit of color to the edges of the flower just to give it a little definition. Now to create leaves, what I do is I use any size circle punch, and I punch a circle, then I put it back in offset slightly and punch again, and that gives you the perfect shaped leaf. It's really easy to do, and it just seems to work on pretty much any flower. Of course, you can get bigger leaves if you use a bigger punch. This is like a 1.5 inch punch. And now I have 3 quick leaves to go with my flower. And I'm going to use just a hole punch to punch holes in the side of the label so that I can weave some of the tissue trim, the Studio Calico scraps, through there and kind of make it look like there's ribbon coming out from behind it. But I'm going to completely fake it and just put it through one end and then glue it to the back, which you'll see me do right here. I'm just going to put a piece of tape to tape it down, and then I'll cut off the end, and then I'll do it on the other side too. I just found this easier than winding it through one hole and back up the other. I didn't want to tear it. And also you can use a lot less if you're a little more careful than I am here. So I'm just going to tape this end down also. And then the other 2 ends will tape behind the paper. But it makes it look like that tissue went all the way through the whole back. So now I've put some foam dots in the back of my piece here, and I'll stick that down so that label's nice and raised. And I also used a die cut, a little white die cut behind that flower that I did on my silhouette. So I actually want to tuck these ends down, so I'm going to peel my card apart here. And that's just Studio Calico paper from one of the 6x6 paper pads that I used on the back of the card here. Just going to glue these ends down, and these ends will get sandwiched between this pattern paper and the white note card that it's going to be stuck to. So I can be sure that it'll stay on nice and tight, not come apart in the mail. So I'll just stick that down. And you could do these techniques on scrapbook pages really easily too, because since this is thin, it's not too bulky. And then I added a few pearls right to the center. You could use a button or a brad here also. And there we have the final card. So just a couple fun things to do with the scraps there. Now the second idea for the second card is to create a layered kind of fringe. This is really easy to do, and I think it's really kind of catchy because it's that soft tissue as opposed to like bulky ribbon. So I'll show you how to create this. I first start by taking some of the scraps and put adhesive just along the top edge, and I'm going to actually let it hang off the bottom of the card a little bit just to make it a little bit fun and a little bit different. And I'll cut the card short a bit so that when I put it in the envelope, it'll still fit and not crunch up this part that's hanging off. So I put one strip down. Now I'm going to just put another right above it. And I'm going to line all my scallops up. You don't have to do that. You can kind of keep it mismatched or alternate, but I kind of like the look of the perfectly lined up scallops. So I did several layers here. And then when I was done, I've got it all glued to the front. I'm just going to flip it over and use my scissors to cut off the extra. It's easier to flip the paper over so you can see where the edge is that you're cutting along. For an embellishment, I wanted a bright blue butterfly. So I'm just taking one of these Studio Calico chipboard butterflies, and I'm going to glue it to some bright blue cardstock. And then I'm going to cut around it, and that way it just turns it blue very quickly and easily. You could paint it or ink it, but this seemed the fastest for what I was doing. And then to give it a nice smooth edge, I just take my Tim Holtz sanding block, any sandpaper will do, and just kind of soften those edges so it kind of smooths it out. And then I go with my ink blending tool and some Broken China Distress ink and just add a little definition to the edges. Now for greeting, I'm using one of the Studio Calico Hero Arts greeting stamps, and I'm going to stamp this with Versamark ink and then add white embossing powder. I really like the look of a bright white greeting on a colorful card. And here it's on this light blue paper, so it's kind of subtle and lets the fringe and the butterfly stand out instead. I really like this greeting because it seems to work for a lot of different occasions. So I'm just going to glue this strip down, and it covers up the top of my fringe. You can see how nicely that fringe lays, and you end up with a really nice and flat card that easily will go through the mail. And when you come out, you know your fringe will be nice and pretty and not be all crushed like you would get with ribbon. Now for my butterfly, I like to hold one end of a string up at the top of its head, wrap it around a few times, and then tie the two ends in a double knot at the top of where the butterfly's head would be. And then you end up with these two ends of the string sticking up that makes the perfect antenna. And this works really well with these Studio Calico chipboard butterflies. It's a great way to kind of add a little bit of interest to it. You could also use wire here. That would be fun too. And there you have a little butterfly. And I also added a few pearls for the butterfly's body. And there you can see the fun layering of the trims. And the third idea I'm going to do is a little out there, and this is braiding of the trims. I like the look of braids, but with ribbon they end up so bulky that when you use this tissue trim, these Studio Calico scraps, they end up laying nice and flat, but you still get the fun texture of a braid. So I just take 3 pieces of the trim and I just tape them right to my table. That's what I'm doing up there. It's just taped to the table. And then I kind of fold them just gently down the center just so that they're easier to work with, just to kind of loosen them up a bit. And then I'm going to start braiding. Now you could instead do like a twist, or if you want your braid to be thinner, you could cut right up the center of these so you have thinner strips. There's all kinds of things that you can do. And it's really fun if you have 3 very different colors of tissue, but here I really think these muted colors went together nicely. So it's kind of funny getting started here. You got to kind of work the tissue, and before you know it, it'll easily just start to braid. And so I have it taped up there. It makes it much easier. So there I've ended up with my braid. Don't worry if it's not perfectly done or is a little uneven. It kind of adds to the character of it. So I'll just put a strip of adhesive right down my card and lay my scraps braid right into it. It doesn't have to really hold it too much because we're going to tape the other ends down. So I'm just going to put it in place here, and we can kind of work the braid a little bit when we're done, but I have no problem smushing this down so it'll go through the mail easily, or you can put this on a scrapbook page easily. So I'll just cut this off, and it doesn't really unravel all that much, so you don't have to worry too much. But I've got some adhesive on the back there, and I also put a little piece of tape. And what's nice is after you've taped this down, it's not too bulky in the back either. So I'll be able to stick this to a card and not really tell that there's anything folded over the back. And then I'll tape this end down also. So the pattern papers that I have on the back of this card are from some of the Studio Calico 6x6 paper pads. I really like the scale of those papers. They're just beautiful. And I'm going to glue this piece onto a craft note card. The craft edge kind of ties in that braid that we've added to it. So I just glue that down, and those ends are sandwiched in there, and it won't come unraveled. And you can see it's got great texture but not too much bulk, which is something that's really fantastic about these trims. For an embellishment, I decided to use one of the Studio Calico wood hearts. I really like these embellishments because of the great look of texture that you get. I wanted to make this a darker brown, so I'm just using my ink blending tool and some distress inks and just coloring it. You want to give this some time to dry though, so it doesn't rub off. So I put some foam dots on the two edges of the heart. That way the braid has room to run right between them, and the heart ends up sitting flat on top of it. I also added some buttons with some string and mini glue dots. The greeting that I stamped here with brown ink is actually from the same stamp set that I used up above, and I've cut it into a strip and then I cut the end to a V. Now I'm putting foam dots on this so that it's raised just like the heart embellishment that I did. And then I'm going to cut the end and make it look like it's coming out from behind these buttons. I think it's always helpful for the design if your greeting strip looks like it's anchored to something. Here I'm going to have it anchored to the heart embellishment. So I'll just glue this so that it's peeking out from behind those buttons. So there you have it, a third way to use the Studio Calico Scraps tissue trims. Just gives you a fun little braid. If you're looking for more ideas on using Studio Calico products, be sure to visit their blog or their website. Thanks for watching.